Hi, I'm Matt Herron, Executive Director of the Harrisburg Symphony. This is a very special episode of A Conversation with the Maestro. Today we're turning the tables on Stuart Malina, and he is the subject of the interview, with special guest Karen Hendricks of TheBurg podcast. You'll see that I'm standing in the Forum Auditorium where we have not been for over a year now. But still, in times like these, there's much to celebrate, and we continue to bring you music and interviews and other programming like this, thanks to your generosity and support. And now, please enjoy Stuart and Karen.
Stuart, it's such an honor to not only have the chance to meet you, but to also interview you. And it would be an honor under any circumstances, but to join you for this extraordinary event, the HSO's 90th anniversary. It is such an honor and a blessing, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Well, as do I. Thank you so much for doing this today, Karen. It's great to see you.
So here we are at this major milestone, the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra's 90th anniversary. I have to start by asking you, what does this milestone mean to you personally? And then maybe in a bigger context, what does this milestone mean to Harrisburg and the Central Pennsylvania community?
Well, I mean, to me personally, I should mention it's also my 20th anniversary with the orchestra. And in those 20 years, I do feel that I'm part of a progression that began 90 years ago. And there have been many devoted music directors, and they've done amazing work building this incredible ensemble. I mean, it started out as a community orchestra with people in the community who just wanted to make music together. And then it developed over time, particularly as we got into the 80s and 90s, into this fully professional orchestra of amazing players. And I really think that the level that we've achieved right now is quite extraordinary on any scale, but also certainly for a city of the size of Harrisburg. And I'm very personally proud of my part in that. As a community, I think it speaks loads about the kind of community that Harrisburg is. Clearly, they love their culture, they love music, and we've had a devoted following for many years. One of the great satisfactions that I get is meeting some of our older patrons, and they'll come up after concerts and say, that was wonderful. And I remember coming here when I was a child and my parents or grandparents took me to the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra, and boy, it's come a long way. And so, yeah, it gives me incredible satisfaction to be part of that history. But the last 20 years have been an incredible joyride for me, and I'm very proud of the work I've done, and I feel extremely lucky to have landed in this position.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, as many of your loyal viewers know, this video series is called A Conversation with the Maestro, and that's because you are usually the host. You're usually the one asking the questions. So part of the fun today is that we get to turn the tables, or I get to turn the tables on you for this special birthday video. So normally you like to start out your videos by asking your musicians about their backgrounds, where they grew up, what instruments they selected, and how they found music. So I'm going to do the same and start out by asking you that kind of question. Stuart, tell us a little bit about your background and how you found music, or maybe it's how music found you.
Well, I grew up in Scarsdale, New York, which is a suburb of New York City in Westchester County. It was a great place to grow up, wonderful schools, great arts programs in the schools. But I would say that my interest in music came pretty much directly from my parents, who are both avid music lovers, patrons of the arts, and they took us all the time into New York City to see great arts there. We also had wonderful arts near to home. And both of my parents played the piano, and they both loved to sing. And so some of my earliest musical memories are sitting around the piano with my dad playing and singing songs, a lot of Broadway tunes, popular tunes. I grew up definitely in the world of the Great American Songbook, the songs of Jerome Kern, Cole Porter, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Rodgers and Hart, the rich tradition of popular melodies in this country. And And it was pretty much inevitable that we were going to play instruments. I have an older sister who's just a couple of years older than I am, and she started piano when she was very young, I think probably age 5. And about a year and a half later, or a year later maybe, my mom started teaching me. And then I started studying, and I was very, very fortunate to have a marvelous pair of teachers. My piano teacher, Drora Arnon, and her husband, Baruch Arnon, who taught performance and theory and harmony to all of the piano students in both of their studios, were just the perfect combination of, first of all, wonderful in terms of pedagogy, but also nurturing personalities. I was a sensitive kid, and Mrs. Arnon totally got me and was able to bring the best out in me. And so I started playing piano with her when I was 5. And I would say that I was a good student. You know, I worked hard and I played well. But the big breakthrough for me came in middle school when I discovered that I had a great affinity for sight reading. And just to briefly explain, sight reading is being able to look at music and play it. You know, normally you have a translation that goes on where you see a line and a dot on it, and you say, okay, well, that's the second line up. In treble clef, it's a G, and then you play a G on the piano. But I discovered that I could do that very, very quickly and with fairly complicated music. And this happened, actually, it's a fun story. I was watching I Dream of Jeannie with my brother. It was one of our favorite TV shows. And in I Dream of Jeannie, Larry Hagman played Major Nelson. Barbara Eden was his Jeannie. And she would, create shenanigans and hijinks in his life. And in one episode, she turned him into a concert pianist. And the piece that he played was the Chopin Military Polonaise in A major. And I thought it was a really cool piece. And I was probably 11 maybe at the time, and I asked my dad to get the music. And so the next time he was at Padelson's in the city, which no longer exists, but was the great music store across the street from Carnegie Hall, he brought home the Chopin Polonaises, and I played it. I actually read it and played it, and everyone was kind of, astonished. And my piano teacher was very surprised when I brought it in that weekend. It was the first of many quote unquote surprises I would bring in for her of pieces that I had discovered. And I would say it was a blessing and a curse. I mean, the curse side is that when you sight read well as a kid, the incentive for practicing kind of goes out the window. And so I didn't really practice as much as just play, and I played all the time. The blessing part was that having this ability really opened up a lot of doors in terms of the kinds of musical opportunities that I would have. So, for example, in school, if someone, an instrumentalist needed an accompanist or a singer needed an accompanist, I would be the person to choose because I was, an incredibly quick study. And I became a very good accompanist through doing that. And this led directly to being the music director for the community and high school shows. And that led directly to conducting operas in college and then eventually to becoming a conductor. But having said all that, even with all of this musical activity, when I was in high school, I didn't see myself as making a career as a musician. I was a practical kid, and it's an impractical career. And I honestly thought that I would go to college and then go to law school and become a lawyer like my dad. But as things turned out, I went to Harvard University, and I planned to major in math. Believe it or not. That lasted one day, literally, one day of class, and I had the most boring math teacher in the world, and I quit math immediately and became a music theory and composition major. And this was great for me. I mean, I don't think I'm a terrific composer. My son Zev is a composer now, and I see very much the difference between what a real composer is and what I was back then. But it was a great course of study for me, and it was a lot of fun. And it afforded me the opportunity to do a lot of extracurricular work. And very soon after I arrived at Harvard, I became the assistant conductor of a Gilbert and Sullivan production of Yeoman of the Guard. And I loved Gilbert and Sullivan. My parents had been in a Gilbert and Sullivan troupe when I was growing up. So I'd seen all of the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. I knew all the words of all the songs in them. And so I naturally was excited to be part of this. And 2 weeks into the production, the music director quit. And so I ended up conducting several performances of Yeoman of the Guard, and this led to more operas. And really, I didn't make the decision to be a conductor until senior year of college. And it took a lot of soul searching and a lot of real thinking. Is this what I want to do? And, God bless my parents. They were fantastic. When I called them early on in my senior year and I said, Mom and Dad, I think I want to pursue conducting. That there was no sense of you shouldn't do this. There was a little bit of a concern because it is a tough career path. But what they basically said was, well, we believe in you. We think you're very talented. And if this is what you want to do, then you should do that, pursue your dream. And, they also brought up, though, would you be satisfied if your career path ended as the conductor of a community orchestra? Would that be satisfying for you? And at that point, I could honestly say yes. My expectations as a conductor were very modest, and I just wanted to do it. And so they were fantastic. And, it actually brought to mind something that my grandfather said. This was my dad's father, although I think that my mom's father would have said exactly the same thing. They were both hard-working men who spent their lives working in businesses that they didn't really passionately care about. My grandfather on my mother's side was the owner of a plumbing supply business in New Haven. And my father's father made inexpensive women's belts, the kind that you would see sold at Woolworths and Kresge's. They both were very successful in their businesses. And my father's father said to me at one point, I spent my whole life working in something that wasn't important to me, so that my sons could go to professional school and be professionals so that their children could do whatever they wanted. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing to say, and I think it encapsulated so perfectly the American dream. I mean, that is essentially what the American dream is. That that you do what you need to do so that your children can enjoy a better world than you did. And so, I'm profoundly grateful to all of my grandparents and particularly to my parents for the support that they've given me in this career. And so that's kind of how I got started. I mean, of course, it's a very long story, but that's the essence of how I became a conductor.
Well, I'm struck by so many of the common threads running through your story, Stuart. First, I'm struck by how, when you look back, it's almost as if you were in the perfect place at the perfect time every step of the way.
It's true. And in really fact, if you progress forward, every job that I got was kind of just a confluence of strange synchronicity that led me along the path that I ended up taking. And even the things that digressed from the path were just kind of serendipitous, coming out of the sky and changing my life in profound ways. So yeah, I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah, so let's continue the journey, shall we? And let's take it on up to Harrisburg, because, it is one thing to relocate to a job, to a city for a job. You go wherever your job takes you, right? But it's another thing altogether to stay in a city and make it your home. And as you mentioned, you've been here 20 years now, so you're celebrating your own kind of anniversary. So tell me, what is it, Stuart, about Harrisburg that has attracted you and kept you here for 20 years so that you have made it your home?
It's a great question. And I'll start by talking about my two previous full-time jobs. The first full-time job that I had was in Charleston, South Carolina. And I was the associate conductor of the Charleston Symphony Orchestra. And it was the greatest entry-level conducting job ever, because not only was I in a really beautiful place, but it was with an orchestra that was by and large made up of young people about my age, many of us single, so there was a lot of just social interaction. We had games nights, we ate out, we played golf. But the level of the orchestra was extremely high, and many of the players that I played with in the Charleston Symphony are now leading players in the top orchestras around the world. And so it afforded me a lot of opportunity to conduct. I think I did 35 to 40 concerts a year with the Charleston Symphony Orchestra. And we loved Charleston. And when I say we, I met my wife, Marty, there. We ended up getting married in Charleston. But it was an associate conductor position, so I was inevitably going to leave. And I was very, very fortunate to get my first music director job in Greensboro, North Carolina, also an extremely beautiful city with wonderful people and a devoted following for the orchestra, and an orchestra that plays on a very high level. It's a rich community, certainly for a Southern community in a city that size. It has access to a lot of really first-rate players, and that's because there are several really fine conservatories in that region. And I was there with that orchestra for 7 years as the music director. The last two overlapped my first 2 years here. And we really enjoyed living there. It was a lot of fun. We had great friends. But at the point of about 6 years there, I started feeling like the job felt a little bit comfortable. Like there wasn't the edge to it any longer. And I was thinking, okay, well, this is a good indication that it's time to move on. And right about that time, I got a call from the then executive director of the Harrisburg Symphony, Stuart Weiser, who suggested that I apply for the job here. My colleague and friend Rick Westerfield had been the music director, and he was leaving, and so I entered that search. But I really didn't have any conception of what the Harrisburg Symphony was. I knew Harrisburg was the capital of Pennsylvania, but I had never been to Harrisburg per se. I think we had visited Hershey Park once, but as we all know, it's not quite the same thing. And so I came to Harrisburg not really expecting to want the job, but thinking it would be a good experience to go through a music director search because I was beginning to look for a new job. And I remember crossing the bridge, driving up 81 from Greensboro and seeing downtown Harrisburg kind of over my right shoulder, and then looking to the left and seeing the incredibly beautiful Susquehanna River over my left shoulder, and thinking, wow, this is really a lovely place. But the most telling moment was the downbeat of my first rehearsal. And I was very fortunate to get a program that included Beethoven's First Symphony, Strauss's Ein Heldenleben, a very massive tone poem, and Chanson Poème, a piece for violin and orchestra that the then concertmaster Odin Rathnam played. And the downbeat that I gave at the first rehearsal for Strauss's Ein Heldenleben, I was just flabbergasted by how great the orchestra sounded. And I immediately started thinking, wow, this is a job I really, really want. And luckily, it led to my getting the job. I mean, I felt very fortunate. I was particularly fortunate to be the last candidate for the position, so I didn't have to wait many months to find out what the decision was. But I was thrilled to get the job. As I say, I did it at the same time as Greensboro for a couple of years. But after we had our first child around that time, and then when we had our second child, it just became impractical, and it was too much for us to be commuting back and forth between North Carolina and Harrisburg. And so I sadly left the Greensboro Symphony and my friends down there and moved here. So why did I stay here? Boy, this is a long answer to a very straightforward question. I've stayed here because my life's been very happy. Truthfully, I don't know what the job would be that would make me want to leave Harrisburg. I'm still extremely satisfied, extremely challenged by my job here. The orchestra keeps growing. I keep growing with it. They basically can play any repertoire that I throw at them, and we've played some incredibly challenging repertoire. And the outcome of the concerts is always incredibly pleasing to me. Is it completely satisfying? No, you don't ever want it to be completely satisfying. You strive for perfection, but you're always going to end up slightly short of the mark. But boy, we come pretty close. And more importantly than that, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later on, it's a joyful group. It's a group that really likes being there, seems to really like playing under my direction, seems to really like being here in Harrisburg, playing as the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra. There are many reasons that the orchestra is as good as it is, but it is awfully good. And so that's really why I've been here. Certainly in terms of job, that's why I've stayed here. In terms of life, and I think as importantly, if not much more importantly, my job with the Harrisburg Symphony has afforded me a normal, balanced life as a human being. And I know it sounds a little strange, but many conductors aren't able to achieve that. It's a career that often entails traveling all the time. And I feel like I don't have to travel if I don't want to. In the last 9 years or so, I've been involved with an orchestra down in Florida in the Tampa Bay area as their principal guest conductor, and this job allows for that. And I've been around to watch my kids grow up on a very regular basis. I mean, there were many years when I was home when they got home from school almost every single day, and that's the stuff I'm cut out of. That is what I want out of my life. I mean, sure, it would be wonderful if my gravestone says, here lies Stuart Malina, a terrific conductor. But much more importantly, I'd love for it to say, here lies Stuart Malina, who was a great dad, who was a great husband, who was a good friend. And so I feel like I've been able to get the kind of life that I want being here. Harrisburg is a great place. When people say, tell me about Harrisburg, it's like, well, it's a beautiful place, but what makes it super special? I don't know. It's just a nice place to live, nice place to raise a family. There are nice people here. There's a good sense of, of normal expectations from life. And you don't have the crazy competition of some of the larger cities. And as a conductor, I don't have the intense scrutiny of some of my colleagues who conduct much, much larger orchestras. I don't yearn for that. I get the artistic satisfaction from the Harrisburg Symphony. That's quite extreme. So I guess that's the answer to your question.
Well, there's so much to love about your story, Stuart. It's incredible to me that you came to Harrisburg with very little expectation. And it was your first time here, except for Hershey Park. We won't mention that. And yet, Harrisburg, I think, by all accounts, has exceeded your expectations. There are so many superlatives in what you just described. It was your first time to Harrisburg. The first downbeat of the music is when you kind of gasp, maybe internally, and heard the quality of the orchestra and the players. And here you are 20 some years later. And there's so much to admire about your story, too. I think a lot of people can relate to that yearning for a normal kind of life and striving for that professional and personal balance is something that, a lot of us do struggle with and can relate to. So the fact that you have found that in such a high profile and amazing position is certainly something to admire.
Well, thank you. I'll also add that, I come into every concert series with the orchestra with very high expectations, and they very rarely fail to exceed them. And it's one of the things I love about these players.
Mm-hmm. Well, with that, we have been talking a lot about music and a lot about performing and a lot about the road that led you here to Harrisburg. So I think we have whet people's appetite. So what do you say we introduce, or rather you introduce, our first musical piece here today?
I would be delighted to do that. Well, given that this is an episode not just about me, but also about our orchestra and our 90th anniversary, I thought it would be nice to show some music played by the orchestra. Although in this particular case, it's played by the orchestra and me. It's a piece for strings and piano, and it comes from our latest stream that we've done for our Masterwork series. Because of COVID, we haven't been able to play for a live audience, but we've been doing a whole bunch of concerts, both Masterworks and Pops, at the Whitaker Center, streamed. We perform it for camera and then stream it to our audience. So for those of you who are watching who have seen this already, I apologize, except I'm fairly confident you'll be delighted to hear it again. This is from Ernest Bloch's Concerto Grosso Number 1. Ernest Bloch was a Swiss-American composer of the 20th century, one of my personal favorite 20th century composers. And he wrote music that I would describe as extremely soulful, always tonal music, a lot of beautiful melodies, and he often lingers in the world of Near Eastern modes. I mean, he was known as a Jewish composer, not just because he was Jewish, but he wrote music that sounded Jewish, and you'll hear a lot of that in this particular movement. This movement is called Dirge, which is definitely it is a somber movement, but I also think it's hauntingly beautiful. As I say, it's written for strings and piano, so I direct from the piano. And I was just very, very pleased with the whole experience of doing this piece, and this is my favorite movement from that piece. So I hope you'll enjoy it.
Well, Stuart, I feel like I am breaking a spell by speaking now. I just want to stay in this place and kind of spellbound for a few minutes after that piece. And I agree with your description of it as hauntingly beautiful. I have to admit, when you introduced it as a dirge, I was a little surprised. And not that I'm doubting your ability, but I have to remind you, we are here celebrating an anniversary and a birthday of sorts. So it didn't quite fit that you were introducing a dirge to me, but now I understand why it is one of your favorite pieces.
Well, I think there's something to, we're celebrating great art and we're celebrating the creation of great live music. And I don't know, for me, the experiences that I have in the concert hall that are most memorable are the ones where the music spoke to my heart. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think that in a sense, it's a low key kind of piece for a celebration, but we'll get to something a little more energetic later on. But yeah, I couldn't be more delighted with that music.
Oh, sounds good. We'll look forward to that. Well, you mentioned in your introduction to this piece, you mentioned all of the procedures and protocols that you've been following, to the T, in order to keep your musicians safe. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't ask a pandemic-related question. Mm-hmm. So, let me ask you, Stuart, have you reflected on the way any major crisis, the pandemic included, affects creativity?
Well, yeah. I mean, this year, if nothing else, this year has tested the creativity of all arts organizations, all organizations of any sort. It's really forced us to think outside of the box. I mean, for 90 years or 89 years, we were an organization where we planned programs for concerts, got a hall to play them in, rehearsed the concerts, and performed the concerts for an audience. That's what we do. That is the model. And suddenly we're in a situation where you can no longer safely do that. Mm-hmm. We can't do live performances, either because of public health dictates from the CDC or the governor's office. When we started the season in October, we weren't allowed to put more than 25 people in a room together. It's very hard to do a full orchestra concert with 25 people, including conductor and recording engineers. And so it has forced us to be creative. And I'm very proud of the fact that it's been a productive year for us. We've managed to fulfill our mission of bringing music to our patrons. And we've done this through these streams, of course, and the musicians are spaced widely. You could see in that last video, and that was for string players who are masked. When we've done concerts with wind players or with brass players, they've had to be spaced even wider apart. So the brass concert that will be coming out next week, I think we had to space our players 12 to 14 feet from each other. This creates real practical issues that have to be dealt with. But hats off to our board of directors. Hats off to our incredible staff, and I'll single out Matt Herron, our executive director, who stepped into this position. I mean, he was brand new to the orchestra right when the pandemic began, and really has handled it quite beautifully. And Sue Click, our operations manager, who not only has run the operations of the orchestra, but has also been the primary researcher in terms of what protocols should be. And she's been the liaison with our players to find out what they would be comfortable with so that they would feel safe while they're playing. Because it's one thing to be safe, it's another thing to feel safe. And you can't make music unless you're comfortable on stage. And so I see our concerts this year as being a tremendous success. I mean, something that is rather extraordinary. And a lot of other orchestras, certainly of our size, have failed to do this as much as we have. Some have done extraordinary things as well, but I think in the scope of the nation's orchestras, we've really done very, very well. And we've been able to pay our musicians, even the ones who haven't been playing our concerts. We made lump payments to them for the ability to stream archival recordings. And this is another way that we've fulfilled our mission during this difficult time, by re-releasing recordings of performances that we've done over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And so this brought money into the pockets of our players, some of whom are really suffering economically. And I'm really proud of that too. And I think that it's made for an even stronger relationship between our players and our management. It's already been good for a very long time. But now I really get the sense that the players feel that the board and the administration have their backs. Not just in terms of when they're here in Harrisburg, but in their lives outside of Harrisburg. And so that makes me very joyful. That makes me very proud. And then, of course, we've been doing things like this, the Conversations with the Maestro. This is, I think, the 9th or 10th of these. We've been doing them almost every month since the pandemic began. And we'll be doing all of these things going forward. I mean, that's the best part of having to be creative in a year of difficulty, is that you get ideas of things that will work when you return to, to normalcy. We will be streaming concerts going forward. Maybe not every concert, but hopefully the majority of them, for those that can't get to the hall or feel like they're that they just don't want to leave home if it's too cold or the weather is bad. We will continue doing Conversations with the Maestro so that our patrons can get to know our amazing players and the other people that make the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra tick. We'll continue hopefully releasing archival recordings, to keep people in touch with our musical heritage. So, all of these things are wonderful developments. And, I couldn't be prouder of us. And I'm very impressed with our board of directors and of our staff for getting us through this year in a situation where we're going to be fine. Mm-hmm. We're going to get through the pandemic. It'll be a bump on the way, but nothing more than that. And I think that going forward into the future, it will not have made us weaker, but rather it will have made us stronger. So all of that is, these are the silver linings to this incredibly vast and dark cloud that has been the COVID pandemic. Mm-hmm. It has not been an easy time, but as I say, I'm very encouraged by what we've been able to do. And I'll add one more thing, and this I think is equally important, is hats off to our patrons. Our patrons have been unbelievably wonderful and generous. In the early stages, most of them donated the value of the tickets that we were ready to return to them. And this year, our fundraising has been unbelievable. Given a time that we're not doing any live concerts, our patrons have been extraordinarily generous with us. And I am grateful now, and I am grateful going forward into the future to our wonderful community for the support that they give us.
It really speaks to the rich tradition. I mean, here we are talking about 90 years of tradition, and it really speaks to this rich tradition of an appreciation and a love of what the Harrisburg Symphony Orchestra brings to the Harrisburg community and all that you have done to build upon that. But I want to circle back to so many of the innovations that you mentioned, because I'm sure you hear this all the time. So I apologize, bear with me, but, let's kind of address the elephant in the room. And people critique classical music and maybe think that perhaps it's not relevant today. And here you are describing all these innovations that you've implemented. And on the other hand, you have people critiquing classical music and saying, how are you still relevant today? So what do you say to those folks who criticize classical music for possibly not being relevant?
Wow. Do you have an hour just for this question? I actually think that's an easy one to address. I'll start with the question of relevance. Great art is great art because it speaks to the human soul. And what's extraordinary about music as an art form, and particularly music like the music we play, which is music that's written down and then recreated time and again, is that when it's created, it almost doesn't exist. It's dots on a staff on a page. It's in the composer's head. Until a human being plays the notes for an audience, the art hasn't happened yet. Mm-hmm. And so the corollary to that is that every time you recreate a piece of music, no matter how many times it's been played, it becomes something brand new. Because live music is live music because it happens once and then it's over. So if we do, let's say we're doing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, maybe the most iconic piece in the entire repertoire, a piece that, every child knows, da 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 da, and it's part of our culture beyond the concert hall. Every time we play that piece, even in a given weekend, let's say we're doing it 2 times on a Saturday and a Sunday, those performances are going to be very different from each other because the people who are playing them are of necessity in a different place in their lives. They may have different things in their minds. They may be in a different mood. They may be a little less or more tired. They may be angry. They may be joyful. They may be proud. There may be something going on in their lives that no one's aware of. But all of these things, when you have 75 to 100 players on stage, create a completely unique environment for making music each time it's performed. Because Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is a spectacular work of art, it has the same kind of power every time you play it, but it's just different. And if you come to concerts multiple times, I think you'll agree that it is a different experience each time. The makeup of the audience impacts very greatly what the performance is. And so, having said that, there's a lot of music from history that isn't very good. And so my job as music director is partly curator, coming up with the pieces that we're going to bring to the audience that I think will be relevant to their lives through live performance by contemporary people. The other side of this as well is that we do new music all the time. I mean, several times a year in our 7 concerts, a large majority of the music is music that's been composed in the last 100 years, and a lot of it has been composed in the last 10 to 15 years, if not brand new music. This is how we perpetuate the art form. This is how we contribute to the addition of new art into our world. But I think that it's as absurd to say that music is not relevant as it would be to say that a great novel or a piece of philosophy or a work of art that you see in a museum isn't relevant. When you walk through a museum, I've been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art many, many times and seen the same pieces of art many, many times over. And every time it's a new experience because I'm a slightly different person than I was the last time I came. You can even walk into a gallery, see a piece of art, walk out of the gallery, walk back again, and it will be a different experience. You see different things. You hear different things. It touches a different part of your soul. There's plenty of art that I've seen at the Metropolitan Museum of Art that doesn't speak to me at all. And I guess one of the major differences between seeing a piece of art at the museum and coming to a concert is, you can actually look at it, it's not for me, and go on to the next one. Whereas in a concert hall, you do have to spend the time to listen to the piece. But I try very hard to make my concerts, first of all, varied. And also music that I am convinced of. I can't remember more than 1 or 2 times in my entire time here in Harrisburg where I've presented a piece of music that I wasn't completely sold on as a great work of art. Because there's so much to choose from, it would be a crime to use one of those slots for something that I'm less than thoroughly enthusiastic about. And so, I don't know. Does that answer that question? Okay, so there's a whole other question now, and the other big criticism that we get is that our audience, when you come to a concert, you look around and all the hair is gray, that our audience is old and dying away, and that soon there won't be an audience to replace them. Yes, we do think about these things, and we're always concerned about replenishing our audience. But if you look back through the history of American orchestras, if you look at articles that were written around the turn of the new millennium, in the year 2000, let's say, they were saying exactly the same thing. You sit in the concert hall, you look around, and all the hair is gray. If you look in 1980, they're saying exactly the same thing. Where is our audience going to be in 20 years? All the hair is gray. And if you look back in the 1940s, they were saying exactly the same thing. And so somehow, miraculously, the audience is replenishing itself. And there's a lot of conjecture as to why this is. My best guess is it's a combination of the fact that when you're older, you have more time, more discretionary money. You don't have children whose schedules you're beholden to, or whose desires to do various things you're thinking about. I also think that maybe there's something about great music that appeals slightly more to a more mature audience. You reach a certain point in life, and you're able to appreciate things you weren't as a younger person. I find that a little hard to relate to because I was loving this music when I was in my pre-teens, but there must be some reason. And that is not to say that we shouldn't be concerned about exposing young people to the music we play. You have to do that. And especially now when arts education in schools has taken a dive, we do need to keep at it. And we try very hard to do that and get younger people into the concert hall, get more of our music into the schools. But it's an ongoing battle. But I'm optimistic. I don't particularly worry about the relevance of our music or the ability to draw people as we go into the future. I think that it's a struggle that we need to continue, fighting the good fight. And I think that the results will be there. If we perform great concerts and can get people into the concert hall, they're going to come back.
Well, you're speaking of relevance and cultivating new audiences and reaching younger audiences, which you do with your youth orchestras and your initiatives and the ticket subscriptions that you do to entice young families and to make it very affordable for young families.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm proudest of is we have this whole program called Musical Chairs where any student up through high school can get a subscription to our 7 Masterworks concerts for $42, I think. But not just them, but also their parents can get the same low-priced subscription. It really makes it very affordable, much less expensive than going to a movie. And much less expensive than these days subscribing to Netflix. And so at any rate, I'm hopeful that things like that will continue to be successful, but hundreds of families have taken advantage of that. And it brings people into our halls. And so when you come to our concerts, yes, you do see a lot of gray hair, including my own, whatever's left of it. And you also see some youngsters, and that's really lovely. And the youngsters are incredibly enthusiastic. And in many cases, the parents end up upgrading their subscriptions because they're enjoying it so much. And so, these are the things that you do. You try hard. You try lots of different ideas, and some of them will work and some of them won't. And you stick with the ones that work and ditch the ones that don't, and try 10 more ideas.
Well, mentioning youth and the next generation prompts me to prompt you to perhaps introduce your second piece, which is a very special piece.
Yeah, this is something that I think you'll all enjoy. At least I'm hoping so. My son Zev, who's 18, he graduated from CD High School last year and was to attend the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University starting this past fall, but decided because of the pandemic to take a gap year. Just put out a virtual recital on piano, and this was done. It was a lovely project. It was done for 2 friends of his from high school, who were competing to become the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society Students of the Year. And so he did this recital to raise awareness for leukemia, lymphoma, and also just to do a recital. And it was a very ambitious program. And we ended the recital with 4 hands music for 2 pianists on 1 piano. One of the great joys of having Zev home this year has been that he and I have quite often played 4 hands together. And this is something I have a long history of when I was a child, because my piano teacher and her husband were 4 hands pianists together and concertized throughout the metropolitan New York area. all of their students played four hands too. And so I played four hands with my sister, then I played four hands with my father, and now I get to play four hands with my son. And there's a vast repertoire. And right now there's amazing accessibility of music that no one even knew existed on a site called imslp.org, which is basically the entire library of public domain music. And so he and I have had a great time this year reading through a lot of different four hands music. And so, to make a long story short, to get back to his recital, we ended it with three tangos by Astor Piazzolla, the great writer of Argentinian tango music. And so I thought it would be fun to include one of those on this broadcast. This is the third movement of four movements from a piece that he wrote called Histoire du Tango, the history of the tango, or the story of the tango. This one is the third. He starts out, in the 1930s, then works his way through history. This one he calls Nightclub 1960. So he considers this the, quintessential kind of tango from the 1960s. And so you begin to hear a little bit of strange harmonies creeping in, but it has such beauty, such energy, and it's a ton of fun to play, particularly with your son. And so I hope you'll enjoy it. This is Astor Piazzolla.
Well, Stuart, that was such a special piece. And I have to say, there is such a bond when you watch a father and a son do something together like that. And even seeing both of you in profile like that, I noticed and picked up on a similar focus from both father and son there. So I got to ask you what it is like to share the piano bench with your son and to share that special experience of making music together.
It's great. He's a bit of a bench hog. So no, I'm just kidding. It's I can't even think of any way to describe it except unreal when I step back and think about the fact that I'm able to do this. I think anyone who has children knows the feeling of looking at their kids and just kind of it being in awe of the things that their children have achieved. And they'll say something and it will be like, oh my God, that came out of my child's mouth. I've been extremely lucky beyond that both of my children have embraced, things that I love doing. So my daughter, who's now a junior at Johns Hopkins University and is not going to be a musician, was a very fine cellist when she studied through high school, and she and I had the opportunity to play together on many occasions, and that was always extremely special. And now my son both plays piano and he also plays bassoon, and we get to play together, so often now. I'm actually dreading. I'm excited for him to go to school. It's time. He's ready, and it's what has to happen. But there's going to be a little bit of emptiness in my heart that I don't get to do this anymore. Playing four hands. As I say, I have such a long background with four hands music. I love that repertoire so much. I do concerts with his piano teacher, Yating Chang, who's married to our concertmaster, Peter Sorotin. We do concerts regularly in Harrisburg, which include four hands music, and so to get to do it with Zev is indescribably wonderful. The fact that he's also a really good pianist, a very serious musician, just adds a beauty to that.
I would love to be a fly on the wall in your house, just taking in all this great music.
Well, and the other thing I'll add, and this is kind of cool, is that he just finished composing a piece for four hands. So you can add a level to that of the two of us playing together, playing music that he created in his mind, and that's it blows me away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to circle back to this idea of being a parent. And I'm also reminded of something you said earlier about your own upbringing and the fact that, I guess all along you kind of had it in the back of your mind that you would become a lawyer like your father. And I'm sure there are a lot of people in Harrisburg breathing a huge sigh of relief that you did not become a lawyer, that you are indeed where you are doing what we presume is what you're meant to be, what you're meant to do. And so here your son seems to perhaps be following in your footsteps, pursuing a musical career. And I want to ask you, a lot of people think that or say that becoming a parent changes you in so many ways for the better, makes you a better person. So how does becoming a father make you a better musician and a better conductor?
Wow. Well, let me start again by saying when it comes to parents, I hit the jackpot. No one could have asked for better parents than mine. They've been so supportive of everything that we have done, my sister and brother and I, since we were children. And so I had really good role models in terms of parenting, I hope, and certainly the kind of support that I want to show my kids for whatever they want to do. How has it changed me as a musician? Well, I guess there are very specific things. I mean, what jumps to mind, we did in our second live stream this year, we did a piece by Richard Wagner called Siegfried Idle, which was a piece that Wagner wrote after the birth of his son as a gift to his wife. And it's all about being a father, the joys of fatherhood, the awe of having children, the strangeness, the mystery, the glory, the joy, the intensity. And certainly, I guess, having had the experience of being a father helped in terms of being able to approach this piece in a particular way. But the way I look at being a musician is that the more life experience you can have of any sort, the better a musician you're going to be. Mm-hmm. both in terms of, your understanding and appreciation of other great culture, of literature, of poetry, of art, of other kinds of music. And there's limitless great music out there of all kinds of genres. And I like to spend some time listening to music that isn't classical as well, because it makes me a better musician. I've had the pleasure of doing a Broadway show with Twyla Tharp and working with her dancers, and that made me a much better musician because I was exposed to that. And I had the chance of acting on stage with Zoe Caldwell, one of the great Broadway actresses of all time. That made me a better musician because I got exposed to how other artists approach their art. It's the same with being a parent. It adds a facet to who you are that is going to impact how you are as a musician as well. This isn't to say that you can't be a great musician and not be a parent. That would be an absurdity. And I'm sure that there are things that you get from not having children that make you a better musician too. It's about, taking your life experience and applying it, bringing it to bear on what you do as an artist. And I can't separate who I am as a father with who I am as an artist or as a musician. And so I think in every way it impacts the way I approach music. It's hard to quantify, exactly what that is, but it would be hard for me to imagine who I would be as a person without my children. They're just they're part of my life, and they're among the best parts of my life.
Mm-hmm. As a mother of 3, I totally understand what you're saying.
I'm sure you do.
When you talk about relationships, I have to say, everyone I talk to who's familiar with the HSO, I've talked to some of your musicians, I've talked to some of your staff and patrons, and all of their positive comments seem to stem from their perception of a relationship, having a relationship with the HSO or within the HSO. And there just seems to be this tremendous tight-knit relationship between all of you. You are a finely tuned instrument yourself. So tell me how you set that tone, because I recognize that must be something that's set from the top down in terms of your leadership. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy on setting that tone and having those bonds where you're all playing literally from the same sheet of music.
Well, thank you for all of that. It's been one of the things that I've gotten from these conversations with the maestro is a lot of feedback from people watching it saying, it just seems like the players who play here just love being here. Mm-hmm. And I think it's true. I think that's borne out with everything you say. You talk to our players and they talk about how much they love coming to Harrisburg. Part of that is that they're seeing their friends and able to get together, and that's a wonderful thing to start with when you're making music. But I do think, for a long time I was hesitant to take too much credit for the culture of this orchestra. But I think, as time goes on, I have to at least bear some of that, because I try really, really hard to keep an atmosphere of respect, collegiality, and fun within the very hard work that we do. And we work really hard. I choose very difficult programs. Our rehearsals are intense and intensive, but I also think they're enjoyable. The other thing to know about our orchestra before I go any further is that our orchestra comes from a large region. We're one of the reasons the orchestra plays so well is that we're uniquely geographically placed so close to several wonderful markets for players. So we're just a few hours from New York, less than 2 hours from Philadelphia, less than 2 hours from Baltimore, and about 2 hours from Washington. And so that opens up a very wide range of really, really phenomenally good players. But we're able to draw those players because we treat them well. We pay them fairly. We provide housing for them. That's very rare among orchestras like ours. And I, as the music director, try very hard to adhere to what I think musicians want from a conductor. And I really do think it's very straightforward. Yes, I mean, there's a lot of study that goes into it. There's a lot of training, a lot of talent that comes to bear. But I think that once you have that base level of ability, what musicians want from their conductor is first someone who has a clear idea of how they want the music to go and is able to convey that to them. That is a primary job. They want someone who's going to treat them respectfully. They want someone who's not going to waste their time. That really is what musicians want. And it's not rocket science. So I guess for some people, studying a conducting score might be akin to rocket science. But for someone who does it regularly, it's just part of the job. The other stuff, though, is stuff that just makes so much natural sense to me. You treat people nicely, they're going to try to do a good job for you. You treat them with respect, and you're going to gain from it. And I do gain from it. When I come into the first rehearsal, I have a very clear idea of how I want the music to sound. But so do all of the players. And these players who are on stage, and it can range from anywhere from 55 to 110 players who are on stage playing with me. They all have their ideas, and they all are highly trained professionals, with no fewer than 20 to 25 years of training under their belt. I think that orchestral musicians are among the highest trained professionals in any profession. Most of them started playing instruments when they were, in their, 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old. And they've studied at the very best conservatories. And so I would be an idiot, I think, to come to a rehearsal and not expect to get something from them that would be of value in terms of how to interpret a piece of music. And it is, in fact, very rare, I think, for me to come to the first rehearsal and the second rehearsal and not somehow change slightly my concept of a piece based on what I'm getting from the players. It feels a lot more like chamber music. When you have 4 or 5 players, let's say you're doing a piano quintet with 2 violins, a viola, cello, and piano, it's easy to have this interplay constantly. There you can have very vast changes in how you conceive of a piece. As a conductor, part of my job is being the musical dictator. What I want to do is basically what the musicians are supposed to do. But I do think it's wise and in my best interest, and certainly in the best interest of the music, for me to be open to adjusting my conception of the music based on what these amazing musicians are bringing to the stage. And I think that what that tells the musicians is, oh, this is someone who respects me. And I do. In fact, I'll go further. I've been here 20 years. I know these people unbelievably well, not just as musicians, but as people. I love them to a person. In a similar sense that I would, that I love my family. These are people who are part of my life. Even the ones that I don't get along with quite as well as with others, I care about them, and I know their wives, and I know their husbands, and I know their children and what they're doing. And that, I think, creates a wonderful environment. We have fun when we play. And for me, the best feedback that I get from audiences is when they say, I come to your concerts and I'm just overwhelmed with the commitment of the players in the moment. They are fully committed to making music in a passionate way. They're passionate about music making. They love what they're doing while they're making music. And that's what makes our concerts special. I do not want to go see the very best orchestra in the world play and phone it in. And I have, and I've seen concerts like that, and it's a waste of time. The Harrisburg Symphony never does. They always come to bat. They always play hungry. They know that they've got 2 shots on a weekend and they want them both to be fantastic. They take it personally. They revel when it's magnificent and they feel badly when it isn't. And that makes me so happy and so satisfied as a music director. And to go one step further, the other reason why our players are happy here is because, as I said before, they feel like management and the board care about them not just as employees, but as people. And I think that also goes a very long way. And for that, I'm indebted not just to Matt, our current executive director, but to Jeff Woodruff, our previous executive director, who really set a phenomenal example of someone who was compassionate, a strong leader, but always a leader who was looking out for the people who were working for him. And so I've been very lucky to have these colleagues to work with, and it feeds back to your previous question about why I haven't left here. Why would I? They play great. There is an incremental difference between the Harrisburg Symphony and, let's say, the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Mhm.
The Philadelphia Orchestra is one of the world's great orchestras, and the Harrisburg Symphony is a really, really good orchestra, if not a really great orchestra. But that differential is incredibly small. And in fact, I would say it's probably indiscernible to many of the people that come to our concerts. And I don't say that to demean them, it's just the fact.
Mhm.
And so in my mind, it's like, well, what would come along with leaving Harrisburg in terms of having to rebuild the culture that I've so painstakingly built here? It just, why would I want to? I love what I do and I love where I'm doing it. And I love the people that I'm doing it with.
Mhm. Well, I'm going to add to that because as a writer and a communicator, I love so many of the storylines that are flowing through the HSO. So here we are celebrating the 90th birthday. You have overcome so much through this pandemic and survived, not only survived, but thrived. And you have this incredibly talented group of musicians and this incredibly talented staff led by your fairly new executive director, Matthew Herron, who has kind of graduated, so to speak, through your youth orchestra itself. I mean, there are so many wonderful storylines, and I wish we had more time to chat. But I guess in an attempt to kind of wrap things up here, Stuart, and yet still pay homage to the 90th birthday and with an eye towards the future, I want to ask you to reflect a little bit and look into your magic crystal ball. I know we're all so anxious to move on from the pandemic. So tell me what you can about the future of the HSO and where you go from here and whether you've started to dream a little bit past the pandemic.
Wow. Well, yeah, I think that the dream is slowly becoming more focused and more real. Certainly, with the release of these vaccines, I'm becoming very optimistic that come October we'll be able to do concerts in the Forum for an audience. I'm hoping that our audience feels comfortable coming back. I mean, that's the biggest question mark in my mind. But it's just been such a long year of frustration. We've been doing all of these wonderful things, and I'm very pleased and proud of that. But in a sense, not performing for an audience is like losing a limb. It's such a significant part of what we do. And as proud as I am of our streams that we've done, they are not live performance. They're recordings of what we're trying to create as a live performance. And so it will be an extremely joyful experience to come back. A lot of organizations, artistic and otherwise, are worried about how they're going to return. Are they going to be healthy? Are they going to be able to get past the problems of this past year? I'm not worried at all. And if I have one message for our patrons, it's that I am very, very optimistic that we're not just going to be fine, but we're going to be thriving very, very soon. We just have the right combination of players, our administration, volunteer support, board of directors, and all of that comes together to create what I think is a very rosy outlook. And so, yes, I'm constantly dreaming about projects that we can do and how can we make things more and more exciting. Obviously, the first step is just getting back. We've delayed our program that was supposed to be the 2021 season to become our 2021-22 season. And I'm hoping that we'll be performing pictures at an exhibition in the beginning of October. I don't see any reason at this point, unless there's some unforeseen disaster, I don't see why we won't be able to. It seems like enough people will be vaccinated and we'll be able to field a large orchestra and put an audience there. So we're going to be counting on our patrons to come to concerts, to support what we do, watch our streams if they're unable to be there, continue donating money to the orchestra. We'll be looking to our corporate sponsors to continue their trust in what we're doing and their pride in their affiliation with us. But am I worried? No, not at all. I see growth in the future. I see more wonderful concerts, more exciting opportunities to play great music, old and new. We've been doing some wonderful commissioning through generous gifts that we've received through our last capital campaign. And I'm very excited to continue doing that. So, I mean, in all of these ways, I feel like not just are we all right, we're in a great place. I think we're going to start the 2021-22 season strong, and I think it's just going to get better from there.
That sounds like a wonderful point to end on. But I have to ask you one more quick question.
Oh my.
What it was like and whether you survived having the tables turned on this interview.
Oh my goodness, it was terrifying. No, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been a joy. Anyone who knows me knows that I love talking, and certainly talking about the Harrisburg Symphony, about my journey here. These are things that make me very happy. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. It's fun to be asking the questions. I love being the interviewer for this series as well, because I feel like I'm learning more about these people who I already know so much about, and I encourage the people who have enjoyed this interview to go back and watch some of the others. I mean, starting with Matt Herron. Matt has such a wonderful journey, and that was our very first one. But we've spoken to so many great players and great people, and we'll continue to do that. So stay tuned. But in the meantime, Karen, you've been terrific, and thank you so much for all of your time and energy.
Well, it's been my pleasure and my joy. Thank you again, Stuart, for this tremendous opportunity to play this small role within the HSO's 90th birthday. And I wish everyone connected to the HSO the happiest of birthdays.
Well, thank you, and it was our pleasure.
Thank you, Karen and Stuart. That was a great conversation. March is the Harrisburg Symphony's birthday month, and this year marks 90 years since our first public performance. Join us this Saturday for a special Brass Masterworks program that runs through March 28th. For tickets and more information about everything we're doing this season, visit us at harrisburgsymphony.org. Thank you for being here.